How do businesses use dark patterns to modify our online behaviour?
And how has the so-called open internet become a closed shop run by a few tech giants? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as usual by the man who bought on the dip, Alex Kidman. Alex, a Google engineer, has been suspended with pay after claiming that one of the tech giant's AI bots is actually sentient. Is this the end for humanity? Which tech should we fear next?
Look, I'm not so sure that humanity's going to be missed, frankly. This week, and I swear I'm not making this up, I got sent, along with a review product, like a little notepad for jotting down notes in, just, paper bound in cardboard. I'm sure the listeners know what I'm talking about. This notepad, I'm not making this up, came with an instruction manual. Just in case I didn't know that I could put ink on paper. As such, I'm not convinced that human beings have established sentience. If the AIs can do it, let them have at it.
Fair enough. So speaking of feared, we're joined again this week by the most feared woman in tech. She's the scourge of dodgy online retailers. It's Erin Turner, CEO of the Consumer Policy Research Centre. Erin, which tech should we fear is going to wake up and decide that it can live without us?
You know what? I'm not scared of tech. I'm scared of the humans behind the tech. That's what we really need to worry about. Tech is neutral, can be used in good and bad ways.
You're so good at wise advice. It's almost frightening.
That's what you might also say if you were a bot too. I think we're going to have to ask some hard questions here. A turtle's lying on its back.
Am I the sentient AI? It's a good question.
The tortoise.
Erin, Eliza, there's not a big gap there.
It's possible.
We'll make inquiries. So Erin's here. She's our go-to person for all things consumer rights. And there's a few doozies this week with the CPRC putting out a major report into the use of dark patterns to control how we shop and surf online. Meanwhile, a few big Aussie retail giants have also fessed up to using facial recognition to track us in store. We'll be chatting all things consumer with Erin shortly, but first we caught up with Simon Sharwood from the Register to talk about how the big tech giants have not so subtly taken over the so-called free internet in the last couple of years.
So for years, the idea behind the internet was that it was this big, open, mostly uncontrolled space. Nobody really owned the internet. And sure, there were wires and you had ISPs and so on, but it was still everyone's internet. But in recent years, some of the moves that we've seen from big tech companies have kind of shifted that paradigm a little bit. We're joined by Simon Sharwood from the Register. Simon, are we experiencing an internet land grab? And if so, who's doing the grabbing?
It's not really a land grab. It's more kind of a strange renovation of the internet that's being done by people who stand to profit from it most.
So fancy new internet wallpapers.
No. I've kind of described what's happening as the internet is shrinking. And that might sound like a really, really weird proposition, given that we know that, there's a trillion TikToks and a trillion videos and a trillion tweets and everything made every day. But as you pointed out, Alex, the internet was this big open thing. And everybody on the internet had to play by the same rules, and every network was connected to every other network, and every network helped every other network to communicate. And in the early days of the internet, what this kind of meant was that to be on the internet, or to run an internet service, a website essentially, you needed your own infrastructure. And so you did the equivalent of opening a retail store. And, if you bought a really small retail store in a country town, or if you bought yourself space on Pitt Street Mall or Burke Street Mall, you knew that, the level of your investment was commensurate in the return and what you needed. And everything was hunky-dory. But as traffic started increasing to websites, people started to recognise that it was really hard, essentially, to run your own store, your own presence on the internet. And that's when a couple of things started to happen. One was that we started to get the equivalent of digital malls. And a digital mall is basically a data centre. And a data centre comes along and says, hey, run your server in our mall, essentially. And just like a mall does a whole bunch of work to, have good fire protection and, really nice wide walkways so that people can get around, and a huge parking garage, and they make sure that the electricity stays on, a data centre does the same thing. So what happened was more and more of the internet, or the things that we wanted to go and visit on the internet, got concentrated into data centres. And then we started to get what I like to use the analogy of is big box stores on the internet. And this is your social networks and your YouTubes. And what they do is they put a whole bunch of content in one place. And so over time, instead of people going out to visit small businesses and small retailers, you get people funneling in to either malls or to big box stores.
So with the big box stores, I think we know who the big social networks are, and we've certainly discussed their ills before. For these data centers, are these companies that consumers will have heard of, or is this your kind of CompuGlobal, HyperMegaNet brand names that only the tech types know?
A bit of both. So essentially, what these malls and these big box stores figured out is that, unlike in the real world where you just need, a car park and you need to be on a main road, they need to make on-ramps so that you can get there really, really easily. And those on-ramps kind of extend to your nearest telephone exchange. So it used to be that the internet, the whole, big open weird internet, was comprised of all these nodes all over the world. And what happens now is your data goes over an NBN wire up to your ISP's nearest point of presence, which is usually in your nearest telephone exchange. And from there, your ISP shoves it onto a pipe that gets to your nearest on-ramp to get you to either a mall or to get you to a big box store. Now, there are two sources of those on-ramps. Some of them are absolutely big tech. Your Facebooks, your Googles, your YouTubes, your Microsofts, your Amazons. The other are organisations that provide what are called content delivery networks, and those are a little bit more obscure. They're your Cloudflares, your Fastly's, again, your Amazon, and a few others.
These are the ones that typically when things go wrong, you sometimes see their brand name come up because the website doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's worth talking about this, kind of slightly shrunken internet. Because, and I've been talking to people about this, the Internet Society, for example, which is kind of the global non-profit that advocates for an open internet, has looked at this and it says, well, hang on, if we've got these providers of on-ramps out there, and almost everybody's traffic is going through them, then they become choke points and they become risk points. And almost everybody who runs a website does use a content delivery network because they provide genuinely useful services. They're really good at finding and stopping things like denial of service attacks. They're really good at providing you with extra security. They can help you scale if your podcast goes viral because you put someone from the register on it. Not likely to happen. But the bottom line is we've got these choke points. Now, the content delivery networks absolutely provide a useful service, but the ones that I think bear a little more consideration are the ones operated by big tech. And when I was researching this stuff, I encountered a report from UK Mobile, which is kind of like the industry association for the UK's mobile carriers. And they are worried about Apple's Private Relay. Private Relay is this new service available on iPhones that's kind of a bit like a virtual private network. And what Apple does is it says, look, pay us a few bucks a month to get Private Relay and everything you do will be super secure and super safe and super private. The mobile carriers in the UK say that when private relay is turned on, they are no longer their customer's internet service provider.
So they're basically just offering a pipe and that's it. It's Apple who's doing all the work on the background.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, they're basically, offering a radio connection, a metered radio connection.
Which has a whole lot of implications in terms of whether or not the ISP is responsible for things and what the ISP's obligations are under law.
Yep.
If they're not really the ISP anymore because it's all happening in this pipe that we can't see into.
Yeah, and what the ISPs say is this is, okay, this might be great for privacy, but if we can't see what our customers are doing, how are we supposed to run our network well? How are we supposed to innovate on our customers' behalf if we can't see their traffic at all? Now,
I'm trying to picture sorry, just hang on a second. I'm trying to picture what this looks like in my head. And I often find when you talk about internet stuff that physical traffic analogies often work quite well. So this is the way I picture what you're talking about. Tell me if I'm looking at it the right way. Traditionally, you've got a city, you've got all the roads through the city, so anybody can get anywhere. And the roads are public roads managed by whatever arm of the government, and anybody can go on every road.
Spot on.
And everybody wants to go different places.
Yeah.
But suddenly, a whole lot of people want to go to High Point or Westfield or wherever, these big malls, these big centres where lots and lots of people want to go, to the point where not just, okay, we've built it on a main road so we can get there, but High Point says, well, we're going to build our own freeway across the city that runs to each suburb. So if you want to get to High Point, rather than driving on all the public roads to get here, drive on your public roads just to, your nearest telephone exchange, and then get on our special freeway to get from there to High Point. But that special freeway is not part of the rest of the roads. It's not managed the way the rest of the roads is. And the government who manages all the roads and manages all the traffic flow can't even see what's happening on those roads. So suddenly there's this whole hidden part of the road network that's more important, so super critical for everything to work, but almost impossible for outsiders to see what's going on. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
You've nailed it. And those roads, those private roads, those hidden networks, they probably run with the same technologies and the same rules as the internet, but it could be the chocolate factory, it could be Oompa Loompas in there. And this creates enormous potential for the people who operate these private networks to exert control. And if we go back to Apple again, when Apple restricted tracking on iPhones, it kicked a $10 billion hole in Facebook's annual revenue.
Well, there's part of my head that, that's kind of crying invisible tears for Zuckerberg's $10 billion loss. I'll be honest. I don't think too many people will be stressed there. I'm curious about the private relay thing, though, and maybe I'm not getting the full detail of it clear in my own head. Where's the compulsion for these mobile carriers to use this? Because at a consumer level, I don't think anyone's thinking, right, well, I'm using the Apple private road to keep stretching our metaphor possibly to breaking point. They're just doing it. At what point does Apple come up to the ISPs with the sledgehammer and say, nice internet here, be a shame if anything happened to it?
Apple doesn't have to do that. And this is the really interesting thing. So I've been reading reports from the International Telecommunications Union and the GSMA. The ITU is kind of the United Nations body that cares about telecoms. The GSMA is kind of the world's global association for mobile carriers. And what they point out is that across the whole internet value chain, the people making money are big tech. And the people who have to spend money are the carriers. So, yes, private relay is pretty much analogous to a VPN, and there are a lot of VPN users out there. But VPN companies are small, and they don't have a billion iPhones in the market. Apple has this enormous reach, this enormous customer base, this enormous market power. And can effectively, take so many people out of the view of the phone companies that their devices rely on, and those phone companies, they're being asked to, buy new spectrum to get 5G, put up more 5G towers, keep that network operating 24/7 during, wind, hail, and snow, and have the really mucky business of sending you a bill every month and dealing with a few million customers, all of whom generate various complaints at various times. Telcos are not a high margin business. Big tech are insanely high margin businesses. And so when big tech starts to run its own networks, and to have so much of the world's traffic heading onto those networks, they do that because it benefits big tech and it helps them to increase their profits. So I'm pretty sure that listeners will be familiar with HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is the software that essentially means that lets your browser talk to a web server. So version 3 of that was just signed off a couple of weeks ago, and it includes a thing called Quick, QUIC, Quick UDP something. I forget what it means. But the important thing about Quick is Google invented it. Now, Google invented it for very good reasons. As it stands, HTTP is really, really chatty. So when you go to log onto a web page, your browser and the server have a conversation that kind of goes, hi there, Alex here. I want to visit insert favourite website, and the website
verticalhole.com.au, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to visit Vertical Hole, and the server comes back and says, "Okay, let's have a conversation to make sure you're real, and I should let you do this." And that goes backwards and forwards a few times, and then once the web server is ready to do that, it says, "Just one more thing. Let's exchange an encryption certificate so that this session is secure." And so there's a whole bunch of back and forth. And that takes time and that takes resources. So Google invented Quick to essentially make that a less chatty transaction. Now, that's lovely. But one of the reasons Google did that was Google wants to introduce some more chattiness so that it can insert dynamic ads. So on the one hand, Google's made things faster and more efficient, but it gets to take advantage of that speed and efficiency in order to make its business work. And that is now an Internet Engineering Task Force standard. Now, Google did the right thing with this. It shared it with the world, but some of the networking wonks I talk to, they kind of say, well, what if these huge private networks that you go over to get to, 80% of the stuff you want? When I asked Aussie Broadband how much of their stuff is kind of, on the normal, boring, classical internet versus the big tech shrunken internet, they said about 20% for old internet, about 80% for new. So there's the potential for big tech to kind of start doing things in ways that really flex their power. And the Apple Facebook thing is one example of that. And the world's kind of hoping we don't get more.
What are other examples? What could what's your worst case scenario here?
Okay, so one of the interesting things that Facebook's app does is Facebook runs its own domain name service, DNS. So DNS is what turns an IP address into a web address, essentially.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've learned during the Russia-Ukraine conflict is the world cut Russia off from DNS servers, and so Russia started to operate its own. The other thing is that so much information and so many services are now, in the big clouds, run by big tech, that if you don't play by their rules as an innovator, you're really going to struggle. I mean, if your new website or app or whatever isn't talking to a big cloud, isn't going over big tech networks, you don't get the advantage of all of their investment. And that investment includes, literally submarine cables.
Yeah.
So, the physical internet and the software internet is now increasingly run by big tech. And if you don't play by their rules, you're not much chance of innovating. So between, sovereign capacity and market-making capacity, there are risks here.
So with the whole quick standard you were talking about with Google, is this Google's subversive way to get past Apple? Because Apple, notably, at least to consumers, sells this story of, oh, look, we don't want you to be tracked and we don't want lots of ads on your iPhone, except, of course, the Apple ads because they've got their own ad business.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Google's way of saying, well, that's fine, but now that this is part of the standard, they're going to be in there. So Yahoo sucks to Apple.
No, not so much, because Quick is open, so Apple can take advantage of it. But it's just one of these things where, yes, they've given some useful technology to the world, and that technology has been deemed sufficiently useful that it's been included in an open standard. But it does, it undoubtedly benefits Google as much or more as it benefits the rest of us.
So, is there a better way to do this? Because we wouldn't want to go back to the old way of not having these big on ramps, I would assume, because they are what help the internet work at scale the way it does. But is there a fairer, perhaps, way to do it?
That's the really, really tough question. That's the really tough question.
That's what I'm here for, to ask the tough questions. That's why I get paid the big bucks.
Because, on the one hand, some of this stuff with the internet shrinking and going largely private looks really scary. On the other hand, you can't do Netflix without it.
Yeah.
So there's a live debate about where money should flow. So in South Korea, for example, they're trying to make Netflix pay mobile networks for the incredible amount of bandwidth that's consumed. Now, there are a lot of people who think that's a bad idea.
I'd imagine Netflix would.
Netflix thinks it's a really bad idea. And in fact, Netflix installs servers at ISPs. And I was just reading a piece today about, how big tech uses its submarine cables to just move data in the dead of night when nobody notices it. It doesn't get in the way of traffic. And this is how it's possible to have N million people all watch Stranger Things within a few hours. You get the content closer to people. There's an ongoing debate about how to share the revenue and the profits of the internet more equitably. And not so much, so that your super and my super does a bit better, but so that the internet can continue to scale. We all know that in an ideal 5G IoT world, there will be many, many more base stations to connect to many, many more devices. However we end up building the internet, telcos need to be able to pay for that. And then hopefully innovators can take advantage of it and big tech can get their slice. But just how this gets paid for is really an open question at the moment.
So this sort of neatly segues into the other topic we wanted to discuss with you this week, because it's a regulatory question and a bit of tech history. Because this week saw, in one sense, the end of big tech abusing one of its monopolies. In fact, one of the first tech stories I covered as a very young journalist, because this week is the formal death of Microsoft's Internet Explorer. And of course,
let's all pour one out for Internet Explorer.
And of course, once upon a time, there was a regulatory approach to Internet Explorer because it was seen as an abused monopoly. Do you think that this is what's needed in these kinds of cases? Well, we do pour one out for Internet Explorer. Do we need governments to step in? Do we need that level of regulation, or is this just a market forces sharing the cash around kind of deal?
Look, I think that whenever governments try to regulate big tech, they do it too late and too clumsily to make a difference.
Well, that's you off the US Department of Justice Christmas card list, I think.
Yeah. Well, they're currently trying to, look at ad markets and things like that. And if the Justice Department or the Department of Comms here is across this stuff, I'd be really surprised. And as I've probably amply demonstrated over the last few minutes, it's tough stuff to encapsulate and get onto a minister's desk and explain to them why you might want to take action about this stuff. Because we get Netflix. And bizarrely, in an Australian content, what a lot of this change to the internet has meant is we get Netflix and we didn't need fibre to get it. So there is that. But I've got to tell you an Internet Explorer story, seeing as I've completely failed to answer the question. About, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, somebody from Microsoft said, "Hey Simon, let's talk about modernising Internet Explorer." And it was just after, I think, IE7 or IE8 had come out. And IE6 was going end of life. And Internet Explorer 6, for those of you who didn't live through it, was the worst browser ever. It had just, flaw after flaw after flaw. It was a dangerous piece of software. It was so flawed. And anyway, this Microsoft chap was, trying to get me a story about enthusing people to get off of IE6. And I said, look, why are so many people staying on IE6? And he said, look, one of the things we've discovered is it does a really terrible job of rendering Facebook. And there are actually a lot of business users who really like it for that.
Sure, you can use Facebook at work if you want, but you'll have to use IE6.
The solution to their problems is, of course, the Lynx browser. I'm sure that'd do a tremendous job with Facebook.
Yeah, Lynx is still out there. I think we ran a story the other day about somebody starting a new Gopher server.
Ooh,
wow. Old school.
Yeah. And from the days when there was, more than one competing hypertext client. No school like the old school.
Well, Simon, we should let you get back to the exciting noise of trains going past your office roughly every 2 to 3 minutes, as far as I can gather.
Yeah.
But before we do, of course, you have to face the vertical hold 3 questions of doom.
Oh, I've forgotten about this.
I'll ask you 3 questions, all in a row. You can answer them in any order you like.
Okay.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current new big contentious question of the week: what's the worst thing you've ever spent your own money on?
Okay, you can find me at www.theregister.com or on Twitter at @sharwood. The worst thing I've ever spent my own money on. Probably going to see Independence Day.
The original or the second one?
The original. In France.
Oh, wow. I can imagine that one going down real well with the French.
Yeah, look, it was kind of that point on a holiday where you just want to sit down for a few hours and not have to stimulate your brain with seeing stuff.
Yeah, that movie would do that.
Yeah.
So, Erin, dark shopping patterns sounds to me like the premise for a great Twilight Zone episode, maybe with Shatner and a monster on the wing. What are we talking about here? What are dark patterns?
Look, really, it's the internet you see every day. These are manipulative online designs that are used to get you to spend more time, or subscribe. One of the things we're really concerned about is the harm that these dark patterns are causing, and that some businesses are using them really deliberately. Other countries have started to crack down on these really harmful behaviours, but we're only just starting to have a conversation about it in Australia.
Just so people can visualize what you're talking about, can you give us a really good example of what a dark pattern looks like?
So we looked at 10 of them, and I think most people would be familiar with all of them. You'll see them across the internet. Pop-ups that tell you there are only 3 left, or a big countdown timer saying this sale ends in 12 hours. The other is hidden costs and things that are added to your shopping cart as you go. There's a lot of really harmful patterns that are used by businesses against you.
So that super cheap airline ticket that doesn't actually involve luggage, food, or indeed a seat to sit on would be a good example that people would kind of know about, that by the time you actually get to the point where you're pressing buy, you're suddenly spending 3 times as much as you planned.
That's it. That headline price of, say, $40, when you get to the end and it's $400, that's a hidden cost. And often there's other dark patterns all along the way, getting you to add extra things or sneaking things into your cart. It's all these unfair website designs that cost us time and money and our data.
I reckon another dark pattern that I picked up a long time ago, I haven't seen it for a while, but I'm sure it wasn't just my imagination, is sometimes when you'd be filling out an online form, and there was like a box you could tick or something to say, don't send me spam or something like that. they would make the form really complicated so you miss something. So then it said, no, it hasn't worked properly. And then you got to go and fill it out again. But they would leave most of it the way it was, but they would untick the don't send me the spam box. So you would then go to the end, go through, and then realize, oh, crap, I didn't tick that box and I thought I did. I'm pretty sure that was not an accident. That was a deliberate design.
I think almost definitely some businesses are doing that. We actually call that a data grab. That's one of the dark patterns we looked at, where companies are pushing you to add extra data to a purchase, whether it's through that pre-tick trap or by asking you things that they just don't need to complete the purchase. Like, why does a business need to know my gender or my home address if they're not sending me anything? Yeah. A lot of businesses are really pushing the amount of data they collect on us.
Does this extend to a lot of services now, seemingly as a convenience, will let you set up an account or sign in with anything like Google or Facebook or Apple? Does that fall into the dark pattern trap as well? Because that's converging a lot of information on us, isn't it?
Look, I think there are times where that extra level of information can be a dark pattern. It really goes to the heart of, is the business actually doing something that's good for you, or is this good for them? That really is the heart of a dark pattern. It's manipulative and it's unfair. I think sometimes if a business is making you log in and, I've had one where I've gone to buy bath bombs and I need an account to buy bath bombs. Why do I need an account and a password with a company to get a bath bomb delivered to my house? It's such an unusual relationship that's expected between a consumer and a business online.
Isn't this where everybody still has their dodgy dude 75 at hotmail.com account that they use for stuff like that?
The burner email address.
Yeah, the burner email address. Yeah.
For spam. I've got one of those. Yeah. I think we shouldn't have it. Basically, this is trying to get us to a discussion where we talk about how do businesses behave responsibly with your data and with your money and your time? Because I think a lot of the internet's become about sometimes subtly and sometimes quite aggressively manipulating us.
So when we talk about influencing consumer behavior, how does a dark pattern differ from, for example, advertising, which is obviously trying to get us to do exactly that same thing? Is there a line at all?
I think it's more of a spectrum is the way I've been thinking about it. Because advertising and marketing has existed for a long time, but we've also recognized that there has to be limits on advertising and marketing. So, for example, don't lie to your customers. I think there's another principle, which is don't really take advantage of people. Don't use your power to push people in aggressive ways. So, there are really rightly bans on door-to-door sales and aggressive pushy tactics. You'd never want a business coming into your nan's house and pushing stuff on her for 3 hours. There's rightfully limits. But we don't have all those equivalent limits. We haven't set them as clearly in the online world. So one of the things our report looked at was what we think are some examples of misleading and deceptive dark patterns. So website designs that outright lie to people, and we've referred those to the regulator. We think those companies need to be stopped right now. And there's other examples where businesses are throwing their weight around too much. The best example I've seen is it's something called forced continuity or Hotel California. You can subscribe, but you can never leave.
Yeah. I think I'm on a few emails like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's even worse when it's tied to a monthly paid subscription. There are really big international companies out there that make you jump through multiple hoops. You can subscribe really quickly, but it's going to be 4 or 6 steps to get out of that subscription.
So are there any actual laws or rules around dark patterns at the moment?
So we looked at the harms that dark patterns cause, and there's roughly 3 different kinds of harms, and we think some are captured by laws, some aren't. So when companies are misleading and deceiving people, outright lies, so just adding costs to your cart that you didn't add yourself, we think that's misleading and deceptive. We call it, say, a major appliance retailer adding an extended warranty to your cart when you go to buy a fridge. We think that's flat out wrong, and that company deserves some really clear action from a regulator. There are other examples where it's called technically a credence claim. Companies are saying something, but you can't prove if it's true. 3 people are looking at this right now, or there's only 1 left. We've asked the regulator to look into that because we have no idea if the companies that are using these really aggressively, how are they coming up with these claims? They might be completely truthful or they could be lies, and they just need a bit of investigation. The other category of harm is an unfair kind of behavior. So, it's easier to subscribe, but it's really hard to unsubscribe. There are no laws covering that at the moment, and that's where we think we did law reform. Internationally, there's been some specific bans on these behaviors. And there's also this really great idea of an unfair trading ban. Australia doesn't have it. I think it's one of the best reforms we could do in consumer law, online and off. And it's something that we think this report helps make the case for.
Where do the spam laws come into that? Because I thought by law, maybe it's only businesses that are based in Australia. If they've got you on a mailing list and you tell them, they have to offer you an opportunity to get off it, and they have to respect it when you ask to get off it. Yes?
Yeah, that's for marketing. So there is a little bit of interaction with some other laws and frameworks. But so look, the examples we looked at for the Hotel California issue were Amazon and eBay.
Mm-hmm.
And what they've done is if you want to unsubscribe from Amazon Prime or some of the eBay services, instantly subscribe. Once you find the way to unsubscribe and stop spending money, eBay, for example, has 4 steps you go through where you ask, like, are you sure you want to lose your benefits? Yeah. You're given a discount and said, are you sure you want to stay? You're asked to give them a reason why you're leaving, and then you're allowed to unsubscribe. Now, it's all things that add up that mean that more people are staying on the subscription. Over the whole population of Australia, we're losing money. That's not technically captured by any consumer law as far as we can see it, but we think it should be. We think companies, big companies, should be doing a lot better on this.
So we're talking big companies, we're talking online. We live in a global economy. How much control over this can we actually have? I mean, obviously, the likes of Amazon and eBay do actually have local operations. They've probably got an interest in keeping Australian law happy, but there's a lot of online merchants who are simply just going to go, oh, well, too bad.
Well,
can
what's
we
interesting
control this?
is, I always will say yes to that. But it's interesting. I think actually Australia's a bit of a laggard in terms of putting limits and controls on this. So there have been really interesting law reforms in California that have banned some specific dark practices. There have been reforms at an EU level, including specific bans and bans on unfair trading. So I'd say there's areas where the internet is already fairer than it is in Australia. They're a couple of years ahead of us. It's one of the reasons we did this report, because we need to start cracking down on this stuff in the way that other countries have. I think we've got some unfair behaviours that have already been removed from parts of the rest of the world.
So are these businesses that have started respecting those laws there and don't respect them here specifically? Or are we benefiting from those laws sort of by proxy because they've cleaned up their act?
Look, it's very hard to tell. It's something we're looking at. We've got a next stage to our research where we're looking at the laws, particularly in the EU and California. But we did notice, for example, that, say, some Google changes that have been made in the EU don't seem to be reflected here. It's always hard to know if there's an equivalent issue. But yeah, I do think that some companies are they're picking up their socks over in the EU, and they're feeling no pressure at all to make those positive changes here in Australia. And if a country is, got these behaviours, dark patterns, they make them money, they give them data, which is one of their big revenue generators, and they give them people's attention, time, another kind of financial factor. If they don't have to make changes, I don't think they will.
So we were talking about tech giants with Simon earlier, and one of the things I know they've been accused of, and that's been had some notice recently, has been this kind of forced buy-in of their brand products. So Apple saying you must use its products, or Amazon selling its products preferentially. Is that the kind of thing that you would count as a dark pattern as well? Those big businesses using their big status to capture customers who might otherwise have broader choices and better buying options?
Oh, look, it definitely could be a dark pattern, depending on how it's shown. There's one dark pattern we looked at called false hierarchy. Quite often it's used, say, if you're making a choice to subscribe or unsubscribe. One button will be highlighted bright green, the other will be really tiny. It can also be used to say preference products. This is also related to your purchase, or you might also be interested in X. That's a hierarchy. And if it's not showing you the full range of options available, or if it's giving preferences to the parent company's products, then yeah, I do think that's a dark pattern.
So it's UI witchcraft.
It is. Look, a lot of the terms we're talking about, anyone who works in UI or UX or product design, they're going to know them. And actually, I think often they're the people who are fighting back against dark patterns within their businesses. They know how harmful that it is to people long term. Businesses that use dark patterns, they might get some short-term gains, but we actually found that 30% of people, when faced with a dark pattern, they stop using the website or the app. This is not going to be something that builds a long-term relationship with your customers.
Because when you think about it, when you're trying to build a really good user interface or user experience, you're trying to understand how people think and encourage/trick them into finding what they want to find, and you're trying to trick them into having a good experience by laying it out the want. So the same, can be used for evil instead of good, and that's where we get dark patterns, I guess.
That's it. And a bright pattern, I think, is putting the user or the consumer at the heart of it. What do
Yeah.
they want to do? How quickly can you help them do it? Versus what's a business goal? Are you there to just boost a KPI, to make more money, to get more eyeballs? If you're preferencing that over the user needs, then that is how dark patterns are born.
So one of the other issues around dark patterns I know is around privacy and shifting from the online world to that physical retail world that we sometimes inhabit. A story that's blown up quite big this week from your former employer Choice, in fact, was a report into the use of facial recognition in Australian retail spaces. And we've sort of talked about facial recognition before on the show, more in the context of places like China, where it's used for social score credits. Erin, why is a Kmart, a Bunnings, or a Good Guys interested in my face?
So they say that they're interested in your face in order to stop theft or to protect their business and their employees. It sounds very, very reasonable. But one of the big issues with this is we don't have a lot of control over what businesses are doing with their data once they have it. They might be analyzing patterns and behaviors. There's not really limits on how they're using it. And there's very little consent or involvement on the consumer side. At most, these businesses have a tiny little sign that you might see if you enter the store and very detailed privacy policies online. But you're wandering into a store. You don't even know that the privacy policy applies.
So do we know, are they trying to match up your face with some other kind of data or records to figure out, hey, it's Erin?
We don't know what they're doing with this information. I think that's the really scary thing for me here. It's there's no transparency about what they do with the data. There's these high level promises. It's just about theft. It's just about theft. But technically, there's no limitations on it. And look, good on the Choice crew for uncovering this. I think they're doing some really exciting work uncovering how businesses are collecting and using data.
There was this fascinating line in the Good Guys policy that Choice highlighted, which I thought was interesting, which was that they would use it strictly for the purposes of security and theft protection, which is what you were talking about, and managing/improving customer experience at our stores. Now, that very much more sounds dark pattern, tracking me, working out, did I pick up the expensive toaster or the cheap toaster? Was I suddenly shopping for a whole bunch of different things that I'd never bought before?
Well, yeah. I mean, technically, they could use it. You could walk into the store, they notice that you look at this toaster, and then they send you a discount code for that toaster via your email that's connected to your face. This is all a possible world. I think the challenge is it's so hard to have a conversation about what harms are happening here because businesses are so they just fail on that first hurdle of transparency. It's hard to criticize what they're doing when we don't even know the detail of how they're using this data.
Retailers are doing a lot of this stuff in different ways, and this is putting on my corporate writer hat. Again, I've written a lot in the last couple of years about how retailers are applying AI and machine learning and machine vision to the cameras in their store to track people, how they go around the store and how they use the store. But they are not trying to identify people as in, hey, it's Erin. They're not even trying to say, hey, it's customer 245 who was here last week. That what they're doing is saying, okay, this customer walked into the store through this door. They walked along this aisle, they stopped and they looked here. They ended up buying that. So if they're looking over here, maybe we've got that stuff in the wrong spot. But some of them deliberately don't use any kind of facial matching in their ability to do this to make sure that there aren't those kind of privacy implications. So then it depends on, well, is it a privacy concern to know that something is watching me walk around the shop, even though it doesn't know who I am and it's going to forget me the minute I walk out the door?
I think that it actually brings up some really good points around. There's legitimate uses for this technology. There's things you can do that are either neutral or beneficial, depending on the view that you're taking. I think a lot of, for me, actually, there's an amazing book written by Ellen Broad. One of the she works at ANU. She's written a book called Made by Humans, and it's all about AI and regulation. And basically, she starts with you can't even get into this until you have transparency. Unless we know exactly what businesses are doing it, we can't critique it. Then there needs to be a level of accountability and challenge. So whatever system that businesses are using, particularly if it's about individual targeting or involving an individual handing over information, there needs to be ability to challenge when they get it wrong, a complaint system, some sort of oversight. And for me, that's what's most worrying about this facial recognition stuff. If you say that they're using it to identify potential theft, and we know that a lot of machine learning and AI has a lot of problems, say, identifying people who have different facial features, who come from different racial backgrounds. How can we challenge the use of that? Do we even know what they're doing with it? So, probably more benign if they're just using it to go, can we make the store display better? A lot more difficult if they're using it, say, to target people from certain backgrounds and say, you're more likely to be shoplifting.
And the day they pull over someone and says, hey, you're the guy who was here stealing stuff last week, and that guy says, I've never been in this shop before, and it gets into the papers, it's going to get ugly.
Exactly. I think these businesses, you can get lost in all the potential of this tech, but not think through, oh goodness, how could this really, really go wrong? But there's already great guidance out there. The federal government have these voluntary guidelines for businesses that want to use AI ethically. Some insurers, some big companies are already signed up to it. There's also some really good guidance from the Human Rights Commission that did a whole project about how businesses can use AI and tech ethically. So businesses have no excuse for not even starting to think about this. There's stuff out there to help them.
I would suggest that listeners also look up a classic Sesame Street sketch, The Great Cookie Bandit, which details facial recognition years before it was a thing, but how to fool it as well. But then Cookie Monster really knows everything. Putting my devil's advocate hat on, we're painting a picture here, though, of a system that effectively is going to make stores more efficient because it's going to show more people the things that they want to see, and it's going to offer me a cheaper toaster. What's wrong with that?
Oh, I love this. This is the marketing argument. I just want to give people great deals. I just want to help people. But any system that's doing that, it's going to help some people and not others. It's going to have target groups and not others. And I think we just need to, before businesses do that, well, first of all, we need a way to monitor what they're doing. We need that transparency. And then we need an accountability measure to go, well, actually, is what you're doing fair? So I was involved at a piece of work when I was at Choice around differential pricing in Tinder. They offered some prices to some people that were very low and some prices that were very high. And that's okay in some situations. We all accept that seniors pay less for the bus and students pay less for a cinema. But if that differential pricing is based on my race or my sexuality or the fact that people who look like me are less likely to purchase, and actually that is very connected to things that I cannot control, at what point is that unfair? And these are the discussions we really have to have when we get into this AI and machine learning world. We can't just assume that because a business wants to be good and they think they're doing good, that it has good outcomes for everyone.
For some people, of course, privacy is a very personal thing in terms of their personal security, people escaping abusive relationships and things like that. Do you think for the stores that are using this, there should be an opt-out clause? Should there be a way for someone to be able to say to a store, look, you might have these cameras on, but when I come into the store, I either don't want them on or I want, all tracking of me to be deleted. Should that be a right we have?
Yes, everyone should have a right to privacy.
How could that work, though? You'd have to know who I was.
Again, I'm wearing my devil's advocate hat here, just so it wasn't clear.
You'd have to invade my privacy even more by recognizing my face every time I walked into the store and saying, so it says, oh, we know him. He's the guy who doesn't want us to know that he's here.
Look, I think at minimum, if we're talking about consent, these stores are saying, people know it's hidden on the website. There's the tiny sign in the Kmart store as you wander in. They're not really doing consent and notification properly. They're not actually letting you know, hey, this is going to apply and this is what it will mean for you down the track. So I'd say there's no consent currently. They can do a lot better there. But I think the bigger issue with a lot of data issues, there's always individual implications for my privacy or your privacy and how companies use data. But often it's a collective harm. The data they gather about you can be used to discriminate against someone else. And that's where we have to put these responsibilities on businesses. It's not just about if an individual opts in. That matters. It's also about what are they doing collectively with that data, who benefits, who doesn't, and as a society, are we okay with it?
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Simon for joining us earlier, and of course, thanks to Erin for joining us right now.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
And Erin, you've been a guest on the show before. It is time once again for the, drumroll please, Vertical Hold 3 Questions of Doom. I'll ask all 3. You can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And as you've been giving us great consumer advice all episode long, what's the worst thing you ever spent your own money on?
I have an example from the last fortnight on that. My partner's been making a lot of fun of me for this, rightly so. I bought gold rats that hold light bulbs. It's little rat light, gold rats. And they make my life better, but there is no way that I needed to spend the ridiculous amount of money I spent on gold rat lamps.
They sound awesome. I said worst. I'm not sure you're meeting the brief here.
Light the lamp, not the rat. Light the lamp, not the rat.
Thank you.
I've made a series of terrible financial decisions like everyone. Bad fees, bad products. But yeah, gold rat lamps is the most recent. You can find the work that I talked about at cprc.org.au/duped by design. It's a really detailed report for anyone interested in dark patterns and what they mean for consumers. We've got heaps of measurements there. And I'm on Twitter at Erin L. Turner. Have a chat with me about data and tech anytime.
Excellent. And as always, you can catch us online at VerticalHoldAU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And thanks everyone for dropping by again. Don't forget to tell your friends about us and leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. So how often do the trains go past? So often you won't even notice.
It's peak hours. Sorry, guys. I should have. Look, if I'd worked from home, there would have been an A380 flying school day. So
It happens.